Okay, welcome to the listening. Ryan Board, how are you, sir? Looking fine in your beard. I trimmed my beard a bit today because it was so scarecrow-like this morning when I got up. I thought, Ryan's going to show me up because he's always looking good. I better at least make an effort to be less of a tramp, you know.
I'm feeling rather flushed, but I haven't. Yeah, I've got the sort of
menopause.
I've got the lockdown clippers, but yeah, can't be bothered, to be honest. No one's watching, so who cares?
Leave it to the professionals.
That's right. Yeah, I'm good. I've seen some very interesting haircuts around here recently. Yeah, but then it's a student place, so it's full of it.
I think there are some good haircuts about anyway. It's a kind of combination of self-cutting, neglect, and mental ill health. And when you mix varying percentages of that in each person's hairstyle, we've probably got the most interesting global set of hairstyles the world has ever seen. If I was an up and coming hairdresser, I'd be sort of studying, taking photographs of people in the street, because I reckon the next sort of 50 years of haircut innovation is already being paraded up and down the high streets today.
Well, I'm kind of interested in like the video calling innovations in a minute. So I needed somebody to take a photo of me a few weeks ago, and we just couldn't figure it out how to do it. But then in the end, I realized that all I needed to find was somebody on the other end of a Zoom call who can do a screenshot. But they just have to be a kind of photographer so that they could kind of go left a bit, right a bit, or like, close the bloody blinds, or something like that. But maybe that's also possible with the old hairdressers, that distant hairdresser in Kowloon Bay or something that you once went to, and then you can have this video call and he'll go left a bit, right a bit, up a bit, down a bit.
Yeah, guided haircut. Somebody must be doing that, right? And if they're not, they should be. If I was an out of work hairdresser,
let's do
it. Should we do the first live one?
Guided meditation.
Guided hairdressing. It's the new thing. That's it.
There
we go. We've already cooked up a multi-million
smashing it
right there.
What's next?
Okay. Bring it on. So tell me what's kind of current for you right now. What's totally occupying, fascinating, filling up your being at the moment?
Yeah, I've been on this kind of voyage of exploration the last 4 weeks with working with somebody very, very interesting who isn't really a counselor or a mentor or a kind of shaman or any of those things. He's just this guy that just sort of popped up, and we started working together on this project that I'm working on. But he's kind of taken me back. This is proper kind of guided stuff. But he kind of really took me back. And he took me back 20 years to the point when we left St. Martin's, or actually the sort of point just before we met St. Martin's, and sort of helped me kind of map out what's been going on since, in order to build a story. And that's been bloody great. I mean, it really has been great. I highly recommend it to anybody who's sort of interested in exploring stuff. But what that's done is that's sort of really helped me kind of bring things back into perspective. And now we're sort of sitting around in home offices and things like that, kind of really understanding what that means to what we're doing now, and this thing that I'm trying to build. So that's been amazing. So it really has. And you're involved.
Apparently. But tell me a bit more detail about what's the process that you've been using to go back. Is there a particular method or technique he uses?
Really, I mean, there was just sort of a series of kind of 4 2-hour Zoom calls, um, very sort of self-indulgent, kind of quite hedonistic in many ways, because it's really all about me. Um, but it's really just this sort of, this tapping into stuff, and you realize how obvious it is, but how kind of little you do it in yourself. You kind of ride this journey, and you kind of end up in these places, and you kind of take these kind of week by week decisions and things, but very often you kind of forget about the path, right? And kind of how that came about and kind of what you're doing. So it was really, there was nothing kind of particularly magical or spooky, but just sort of logical, just this sort of logical kind of pathfinding thing. And what that's kind of helped me to do is to sort of understand exactly what I'm doing now, like, exactly what we're trying to build now, and kind of where the kind of why that's happened.
Well, what was he sort of interviewing in a way, kind of bringing out, asking questions to
Yeah,
sort of draw out of you what your personal story is, or rather what your underlying mythology is?
yeah. I guess I guess it's the latter, right? It's that sort of underlying mythology, and also kind of why you do the things that you do.
Yeah. So it's reminding you of who you really are,
Yeah,
which can get lost, as we
yeah,
all know, on the journey of life and work and kids, and
yeah,
you can, and it's often in our maybe late teens, early 20s, when we're really deeply finding out who that is, what our story is, or we're kind of almost writing it at that point, that that's the place to go back to sort of remember who you really are, or who you were then, that informed everything that happened since.
yeah. It reminds me of that Reeves and Mortimer sketch where they used to do that, like, "This is your life." Do you remember that?
I don't remember that one. I was a big fan at the time, but I
It's sort of
don't.
ridiculous. This is your life thing, and then you would get this sort of like a foray of kind of people and places, like this kind of weird flashbacking type thing. Um, anyway, it's just sort of interesting. I don't know, maybe it's because I had kids recently, or because the lockdown, or kind of what it is, but there just seems to be this sort of this need for this thing to happen. So, but it's really, I mean, the path that you and I trod, kind of leaving school, or kind of even entering school, is a really, when you kind of really dig into it, it's a really kind of exceptional path.
So to let anyone know who's interested, so Ryan and I met on on a course, a painting course, fine art painting, um, degree course at St Martin's in London in 1993. Is that right? Was it 93 or 94? 93.
94,
Okay, 94.
26 years ago.
Yeah, fucking hell, a long time ago.
um,
We went on that 3 years, and even after that, because it carried over, didn't it? After we left, but we
yeah, it
had
hasn't stopped.
we put well, yeah, maybe it's never actually fit. Yeah, that's true. Actually, when we kind of reconnected about a year ago, I realized, oh yeah, we're just carrying on. And I have that with Igor as well, where it doesn't matter how long the time is between us seeing each other, we just pick it up and carry on from where we left off somehow.
Yeah,
And maybe it relates to that sort of idea of who you actually are, and those people who are part of the fabric of your personal underlying mythology, you can always carry on with them. There's no awkwardness, no matter how time has passed or what's happened, because
yeah,
there's something archetypal or fundamental in your relationship that just switches on again when you see them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I think it's probably a function of many things: the lockdown, the time in our lives, personal stuff going on, kids, work, whatever it is. Um, but I got a little pointer. I go and see this amazing osteopath in Norfolk, and I had this really powerful session with her about a month ago. And out of the sort of coming out of it, she suggested that I go back to Manchester and go and see the people, she said, who, when you first started doing things that were really who you are and really kind of inspired you, the people that you met and found at that point and that you kind of just formed friendships with very readily.
Yeah.
She said, maybe go back and see those people. And I've got this plan now coming out of lockdown to do a little trip back up north, and I want to go and visit all the places where I grew up, and go to the places that where I had amazing experiences or very kind of powerful moments occurred, and just revisit them, and then go and see these people who really saw me for who I was at that time at the beginning, and just reconnect, and I've reached out to a couple of them. The two that kind of came to mind immediately, one was a musician that I lived with for a while. He was a bit older than me, a French guy, who'd come to Manchester because he loved the music scene in Manchester, and this was before it became a thing, the music scene. But he'd been sort of drawn in by the sort of early 80s or 80s music and that alternative music scene that was going on in Britain at the time, and particularly stuff coming out of the Northwest, Liverpool, Manchester. Um, and he's somebody I met on a sound recording course that I was doing because I had a band at that time. We were just like, it was the classic sort of garage band where four friends who can't play any instruments decide because they love music they want to form a band. So we all picked an instrument and started learning together. And after like 2-3 years, we could actually play something. It was an amazing time. But and that led into this sound recording course, and then I went and then I met him, and that's when I started meeting these people. And then a couple of years later, I started an art foundation, which is what ultimately led me to London. And I was sharing a flat with a guy, Joey, who was another one of those people who really saw me for who I was, and I had a very sort of strong bond with. And I've just reached out to him as well, so I'm gonna go up and see them. Yeah, and it's interesting you talking about this idea of remembering, and what it is that's behind all the things you do. I think it's so important, and perhaps universally now at this time when societally we're kind of disintegrating. The way through is for each individual person to really remember and go into themselves and say, well, who am I? What is it I really believe in? What is my truth? And try and align your life in some way to that.
Yeah.
As a way of kind of navigating the world, even.
Yeah. There's a lot of confusion in the world at the minute. There's a lot of people kind of going, what am I doing? How did I end up here? Or like, and I think there's not enough of that. There's not enough of that kind of really, digging into that sort of understanding of kind of your journey, kind of where you got to. But I think the bit that I'm finding kind of most interesting is that sort of, and you'll kind of remember this, but that sort of period through school, and perhaps a kind of few years after, maybe even sort of 10 years after, where things sort of happened, like things just sort of flowed, and things could come together quite easily. And I've been sort of thinking a little bit about how, I think it sort of, kind of cast your mind back. It used to be a lot, it's going to sound like a couple of old gits now, right? But it used to be quite easy to bring things together. It used to be quite sort of effortless for things to sort of, coalesce and sort of people to stick together and for people to sort of make things happen. And so I was thinking quite a lot about, our graduation show, this, like, the way that that just sort of came together. And if we really think about how we did it, we sort of, you couldn't really put your finger on it. It just sort of happened. And there's been like a whole sequence of things which sort of happened from there. And it was a sort of spirit of people sort of coming together to make things happen that came out of there, which was very fluid and organic, and it sort of flowed quite nicely.
That's interesting that you bring that up because I hadn't thought about it like that. But
It's a flow,
yeah,
right?
it is this collective intelligence where there's a kind of rolling hierarchy where in any one moment somebody might be leading the way or making a decision about this or that, but then it changes moment
Yeah,
to moment, and everyone is very much individually expressing themselves in exactly the way they want, but it's done in this collective way and a creative way where you're doing your bit, but you'll change it slightly, not in a compromised way, but in an inspired way to kind of bounce off something somebody else is doing. So, you see what they're doing over there and what you're doing, you think, oh, that, there's something in that maybe shapes how you're creating something. And then overall, you end up with this incredible kind of rich mix of things, which is so vibrant. I mean, that was a very special moment. And we really kind of went against what the institution was expecting and asking because degree shows back then were and I don't really know, I haven't been to any recently, but they were just like everyone has their little white box and they put their work and you come and have a look. Well, we took a whole floor. Were there five of us? Yeah. So five of us had one floor, and instead of breaking it into five separate places, we knocked a lot of walls down and we created one gallery space, didn't we? And it all kind of got mixed together, um, but not like it was one piece of work by five people. It was very much five people's work, but in a kind of collaboration with the space.
yeah. Yeah, it was great fun. It was mega great fun. And we had the roof as well and the lift shaft.
Yeah,
I remember.
we'd already worked out we were going to bust out onto the roof. We the fire door so we could get out without setting alarms off.
And a couple of sleepovers as well, completely illegal, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
great.
Oh, yeah. They were some of the highlights of college for me. Those
Yeah.
was it because these were back in the wonderful days where control wasn't quite so strong as it is now, and probably with CCTV and everything, you might not get away with it now. But
Well,
we
you
used
could flip
to,
the security guard a cornetto and get away with
yeah,
murder. And now you've got G4S.
yeah, 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 yeah. So
But
at the end, I think it was like 9 o'clock. They used to close the college, didn't they? And we would all hide in these little sort of. It was a bit like Nazi Germany. We'd have these little compartments, or like Reformation England, where you'd hide the Catholic priest. We built all these little sort of hideaways, didn't we, behind the walls and things, where we just kind of stayed in there when they did the rounds to switch the lights off and shut everything down.
yeah,
And then, like half an hour after that, after we thought they'd all left, we'd come
yeah,
out and then get on with it.
yeah. It was a really interesting few years. And it was also pretty. That was a highlight. One of the lowlights was the year before we arrived. The Charing Cross Road site lost its license to sell booze because the barman had been selling LSD under the bar, and people started jumping off the roof. So they kind of like,
I didn't know about that.
yeah, that's why they had all those nets up everywhere, all those kind of safety nets all over the place, over the kind of light shafts and everything. So
They were to stop the pigeons.
stop. You're supposed
Not
to
to stop the students.
to stop the
Stop the pigeons flying, not the students. But surely in an art college, you always get students trying to fly off the roof, LSD or not.
Well, exactly. Safety nets are a standard now.
Yeah.
But
That's funny because when I went to look round the colleges to see where I wanted to go, St. Martin's straight away I knew it was the one because it felt good and I loved that bar that was like it was part of the college. It was like you
yeah,
had studio, then a little bar in the corner. And it was one of the things that I thought, wow, that's great, you know.
yeah,
And isn't
yeah.
that where the Sex Pistols played as well? There's all kinds of musical and art history tied up with that bar, I
It
think.
all went down there.
Yeah.
It all kicked off there at various moments. But if I also think back, not to lament too much about this point, but if I think back about like that 3 years, I don't remember. I also sort of don't remember any conversations with any grown-ups or kind of tutors or anything. You know, it was very much like do your thing, and that was kind of interesting. It was kind of lawless, and then you kind of like you couple that with the IRA kind of busy bombing
Oh yeah.
bits of London at the same time, and then sort of having to kind of be locked into pubs for sort of hours and hours on end. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was you can't blame the IRA for the lock-ins, Ryan. That I think we were creating the
Changed my life.
circumstances. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's interesting about the bar closing because then we got there in the autumn to start our course and there was no bar. But of course, what we then did over the 3 years, we would always have those studio parties where we kind of did like happenings, really, weren't they? Where we did these installations and
Yeah.
we would run our own bars basically. So on a number of occasions, we basically set up spontaneous bars.
Yeah.
So we
That's
did, in a way, that was kind of cool because we might not have done that had there been a bar on site.
what became publicans and learned to have a sort of very good relationship with alcohol and not art.
Yeah, we did a lot of alcohol.
And also kind of learn the intricacies of every single pub in the area. And I still do. If you go back, you kind of know exactly where everything is.
Yeah, it was such a wonderful site because it's not there now, is it? They moved it to King's Cross, didn't they? The
Yeah,
art
it's
school.
trashed.
So it was on Charing Cross Road, so you could fall out of the college and you were basically on the edge of Soho. So yeah, we had some really wonderful times in those little boozers around nearby, didn't we? It was like not clocking off from the studio and then straight
Yeah.
into the Coach and Horses or what
Do you
was
remember
it,
that?
Cambridge
Remember
Art
that
House?
night? Do you remember that night we went out? And I don't know why we did it, and I don't know what you were doing with it, but you had this fucking huge iron chain
And
for
I
some reason. I don't know why. But you were wearing like a blue boiler suit, and you had this kind of
Oh
iron chain.
yeah,
And you
yeah, yeah. That was actually in Hackney when we were in at the factory there because there was a party at Lenny's place over in Dalston. Is it Dalston? Yeah.
had,
And yeah, I had an orange. It was an orange jumpsuit. You know those penitentiary
yeah,
outfits that they
Guantanamo
wear in the
style.
States, like an orange. So I was basically a convict. I think I had a shaved head at the time. So yeah, I can remember walking back from Dalston to Hackney in the middle of the night, in a very poor state, carrying my chain, and thinking, how did I not get like mugged or murdered? But then I probably looked pretty terrified. So maybe people were running away from
There
me.
was kind of one night though where we walked through Soho with it, and but we were kind of amazed because basically everybody wanted to talk about your chain.
I don't.
Everywhere we went.
I must dig that out. Yeah,
Like,
useful prop to have.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Anyway,
was. It was an incredible time for creativity. I mean, as you'd expect in an art college, but like you say, there wasn't really much guidance then, or there wasn't any teaching really. There was a little bit. You could go out and find a little bit if you wanted it, but it was mostly just a group of people together finding
yeah,
out what they wanted to do. And
yeah. I remember Matthew Collings coming once and talking about crop circles. That's all I remember.
well, I remember Tracey Emin coming in and doing a talk, and I was like falling in love with her and offering myself as an assistant, but she wasn't having any of it.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's just that there was this sort of moment, and kind of quite soon after that, where where things kind of come together quite organically and naturally. I think this is the bit that I'm quite excited about now. It's kind of like understanding what made that happen and like what makes that happen now, and like how you can sort of grab hold of that now, because it's really difficult to find that these days. And I don't think that's because we've kind of moved on psychologically, we're sort of old gits and the rest of it, but it's very difficult to kind of piece things together now, for various reasons. And it's sort of, it's very interesting to see how you can kind of pull that back together.
Well, maybe it's because things are coming apart in a general sense that's harder, but also the conditions may be becoming more amenable to what you're offering. It perhaps the time wasn't quite there. You say that you could do it a little bit back then after college, but I think maybe the conditions are now starting to form where this way of operating that you're hinting at may be exactly the thing. And it may be the thing that we don't just do in creative projects, it may be how we do everything. Government, finance, trade, everything may actually be done in this more kind of decentralized,
Yeah,
collectively intelligent, networked, spontaneous,
yeah,
um, free way. I mean, this is what obviously, the forces, the powers in control right now are the antithesis of that, and they're doing everything they can to try and not allow that, not out of any kind of malice, but just out of self-preservation. But it's slipping away, that control and that power, even as the technology seems to be making it more concrete and far-reaching. But I feel like in the people themselves, especially like you or anyone who's kind of come from that place where really the future was being formulated by people living lives, which is what every generation has, their artists and visionaries and people who are through their own experiments with their lives are trying to find ways forward or ways towards our higher selves, ways towards freedom, ways towards increased creativity and true wealth for everyone.
yeah.
So it's exciting to hear you talk about this. But before we get into that more, I'd like to know what are the personal things for you that you discovered about this mythology? What are the kind of nuts and bolts of what makes this the way you want to do things? Does that make sense? What is it specifically in you that is an essential part of who you are that makes this way of doing things that you're talking about the thing you need to be doing?
I have no idea. Yeah, it's a weird one, huh? But you kind of you I think you could argue to a certain extent that sort of having a kind of art school background kind of gives you that mentality of kind of anything's possible, or that I mean this is also kind of another chapter of stuff to dig into, but it, for somebody who's not involved in kind of art and not involved in that, in sort of creating art, the subject of art and kind of making art is a bit voodoo. Like it's a little bit, it can be a little bit sort of out there. Um,
But it's human creativity, right? So everyone actually has that in potential. I mean, culturally, we're told that some people are artists, some people aren't, but that's all bollocks. I mean, everyone is by their nature, by being human, they have that creative potential, and it's
Yeah.
more conditioning or practice or
Yeah.
whatever that makes some people self-select for art. You know, and I think it probably wasn't art college that that brought that out in you. You must have had that in you already, expressing or the desire for that, and that's why you went to art college. So that's why I'm kind of asking about, you know, trying to find out more about you personally that drove you on that journey. You know, what sort of took you there in the first place? Why did you want to go and do an art degree, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, you know, I didn't choose it actually. I just sort of followed my nose. And I think, you know, it's kind of one of those sort of cliche things to say that, you know, he's always been a bit creative, you know what I mean? But you kind of, I have been always kind of creating things and kind of making things, usually sort of by myself. But what I think finding kind of art school kind of made me realize that, okay, you can do this. You know, this is the thing that you can explore. This is the thing that you can do. You have permission to do this now. You know, and but the bit that I sort of I started to kind of understand maybe about 10 years ago was that all of that has been sort of the greatness in sort of in being able to kind of stretch things and having permission to stretch things is golden, right? And you can end up in an art school kind of psychology in an art school space and, you know, just do your thing, explore things, create things. But when you start to understand that actually there aren't any limits, like you can actually do whatever you want. You can, and part of your job is actually to stretch things beyond the kind of the normal boundaries. It's a bit like a sort of elastic band, and your job is to kind of find the edges, you know, before it breaks.
Yeah, find
And
your
that's really that's what modern art is all about, really. And it's about kind of showing that to people, you know, and kind of and demonstrating that, kind of making people think and presenting that in you know in kind of various ways. So, but the bit I really love about that story is that it's not, you know, it's not the sort of I mean, I don't think we painted anything in school. I actually spent I remember spending about 4 months restoring vintage vacuum cleaners or something. And then kind of making bubble machines out of kind of toilets and things. And then, you know, and we had, yeah, you know, kind of endless parties where there was no limits and you could kind of just, you know, we could just push it and push it and push it. And what I've learned is that I didn't really kind of realize that or appreciate that at the time. We were just sort of doing it. But what I've learned since is that that whole kind of psychology and methodology towards doing things is just golden in terms of kind of making things happen in the real world, you know, and kind of stretching the limits in things. And so I don't kind of know how it came about, but the journey has sort of ended me up in a place where I kind of always just thought, well, anything's possible. You know, you can see it, you can kind of picture it. You know, if you can kind of think it, then you can kind of do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you and I were probably quite similar in that sense, and maybe that's what brought us together was that neither of us did much painting on a 3-year painting course. We were always exploring multimedia areas and things that weren't even considered media. Really, the world was the medium that we played with. And there's something really relevant in that as we talk that comes up, which is what that desire we had, that desire in us that led us to explore all these things and really to include everything as a possible ingredient in a creative act, gave us a perspective on things that was holistic, that was multidisciplinary. So we could take something, you know, we could take vacuum cleaner, electronics, mechanical workings, get into that world, combine it with something a bit sort of dada or kind of irreverent and fun, like the bubble machine, with the urinal or the toilet or whatever it was. But what was going on around that was this a bit developing like a skill of being able to notice connecting patterns between very separate universes, because we'd come from a tradition of reductionism, where every human endeavor had been separated off into its own little place, and people were exploring the great depths of each discipline, but nobody knew what the other person was doing or understood anything. Your traditionally your kind of, I don't know, astrophysicists didn't know anything about golf, or I don't know, but you know what I mean. So what I think we were doing was, unconsciously, there was this desire to unify things, or have a kind of knowledge of things from the full spectrum of what was available, and find interesting and creative ways to bring them together, and maybe quite novel ways that had never been seen before or thought of before, but because of the way we were looking at stuff, it seemed quite obvious. And you were saying follow your nose. It's like quite intuitively you would go, oh yeah, I want to bring that in now. I want to bring that in now. Oh, that looks good. Oh, I like that. Let's have some of that. And there was no sense of, oh, you can't do that because that won't fit. No, it was just like, let's bring it in and play with it and see what happens.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think this perspective is what's emerging in the world. And
yeah.
I feel like
But
this is where the edge of humanity is. It's this multidisciplinary, multi-perspective, um, being able to jump from one thing to the other, being able to combine unusual things in the moment to create the best outcome, and then leaving it aside and finding what's next. Or what do
yeah,
you think?
there's a kind of I always thought uh, I was kind of quite unsure what we were doing once we left, because you're kind of thrown out onto the streets after school. You're like, just get on with it, and there's no kind of there's nothing. There's just like
No counselling. There's no counselling for what you've just been through.
there's nothing. There's no money. There's no guidance. There's no accommodate. There's nothing. There's just like there's no studio anymore. There's nothing. So you have to kind of choose your own adventure quite quickly. But the
Well,
thing I
especially Ryan, especially if you're not producing artifacts that are recognized by the established art world, that you can then get a gallery, sell
uh,
your work. I mean, if you're doing the kind of the blurred sort of multi-form thing that we were into, there was no market for that. Nobody was going to pay you for that or give you, so that made it very clear that there wasn't a career to go into.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, yeah, totally, totally. But even the kind of people that chose that path also kind of quite quickly found that it wasn't it wasn't a kind of well-trodden path. It's a slightly kind of it was a sort of maybe slightly superficial path, or kind of like, you didn't tell me this was going to happen type of path. But the bit that I kind of really cherish, and the bit that I think um, could do with sort of kind of being kind of lifted a bit in art schools now, is a bit more of a kind of acknowledgement that there is this sort of thing called kind of art. It's a bit of a sort of art school thinking, and you go to an art school, not necessarily to learn anymore how to sort of paint horses or kind of pretty pictures, or make sculptures or something, but actually to just sort of train your mind into how to sort of think about things, and sort of how to kind of teach yourself that there, where the boundaries are, and also kind of where your own boundaries are, kind of, where your values are. And I think I've done a bit of teaching since we left, and done a bit of tutoring back, and it gets missed very quickly, all of that. I did a bit of teaching in Denmark at a very good art school, a design school, and they had a kind of problem there that people were coming from all over Scandinavia to go to this school to learn to do design work. And there was a kind of preconceived kind of mission that everybody was going to become the next Bang Olufsen designer or something like that. And that they completely missed this thing that actually no, you take this time and space to kind of really think about, breaking things down and kind of thinking about things in new ways. And once you've kind of got that, then you can go and design a radio or something. So, yeah. Anyway, cherished times. But I'm kind of super interested in kind of why that's kind of changed now. I'm sort of kind of discovering a few kind of threads now, which are kind of giving me clues as to kind of what's going on there. And I think the internet's had a lot to do with that. This has had a lot to do with sort of breaking down that sort of spontaneity and that sort of ability to just sort of, because that's pre-internet, really.
Yeah, it was just at the start, wasn't it? We were there.
Yeah.
People were getting mobile phones, but the internet was very basic at that point. It wasn't center at all.
And tech is great. Tech is brilliant. It is great at sort of helping in certain ways, but what it hasn't been great for, I think, over the last 20 years is sort of really helping people to sort of do that, to sort of be free. And
yeah, it's become a drug, and it's become owned. There was that wonderful period where the world didn't really understand what the internet was, and it was the Wild West, and it was free, and you could do incredible things.
Yeah.
Now, very recently, in the last 10 years, I guess, the corporates and the controls just closed it down. But this kind of speaks to maybe what you're involved with now, because there's also these rumblings now about Web 3.0, where somehow we're going to bust out of the jail that's been created and actually, give it's such a massive potential for good, the internet, if it's liberated, if the old patterns of control and commerce are not completely dominating. I mean, I'm feeling like everything that's happened in recent times with all the censorship and the deplatforming is really kind of killing off those dinosaurs now. It's the beginning of the end of them, I think, because they're really forcing people away, and they're forcing innovation. They're forcing people to want to find ways to bypass the control. So, like an arms race,
Yeah, well, we're kind of finding the edges, right?
Yeah. So it's great. So there may be now this kind of, given everything we've learned, this sort of expansion again, but with a lot more intelligence, and that's exciting. And I don't know much about that. You probably know a lot more because of what you've been working on. Well, tell us. Let's have the conversation about Folkalist, because it'd be interesting for people to know what it is you've been involved with in the last few years.
Yeah.
What project you're working on?
So after a kind of, it's all kind of relative, but after kind of messing around in London for quite a while, I was sort of had this sort of idea that the future was in bringing kind of like creative people together to solve problems. All right, and that there've been so many sort of big issues out there that aren't sort of, don't seem to be kind of being dealt with or kind of met. And so kind of like 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of packed up the family and we kind of ran to Barcelona and decided to start a think tank. I thought, like, this is the future. This is the future. Like, we can only kind of make things work by bringing people together, creatively thinking about things and kind of spewing things out, and using that sort of art school thinking in a lot of ways, or that sort of that free-flowing kind of stuff, that juice to find solutions. And we find kind of a lot of rubbish and kind of spew out a lot of stuff, but there would be something there for kind of digging into finding solutions, and also kind of surprising ourselves a little bit, and also finding more edges. And kind of, so what I found was, so we kind of shunted the whole family to Barcelona, set up a space called Studio Zamora, and set about bringing people together to make this thing happen. And what I found, like really, really quickly, that even though you've got like the most sort of innovative, up for it, creative, cool, interesting, asymmetric people in the world gravitating to Barcelona at the time as a sort of like a massive magnet for stuff, that was just sort of still really difficult to kind of bring people together to do this thing, or to kind of tap into kind of what people were all about, and trying to find people and to find resources. And after kind of hacking away at that for 6 months, I just thought, sod it, like there's a kind of massive issue here in sort of bringing people together, and it can't be done. So we started building Folkalist instead. It's like, okay, let's do this first. And so Folkalist was a project that started at that point to think about kind of what would be, how could you use technology to bring people together based on their, their kind of real skills and their real kind of quirks and whatever. Because we're really kind of trying to find those kind of sparky magical bits, and it's really difficult to find that on the internet. It's difficult to find that.
Ryan, just to stop you for a second to get a bit more into what you were saying, what was it that was stopping it working with the physical space that you had? Why wasn't it? What was it that you were observing that made you realize this isn't happening?
So we're still kind of unpacking that now, but it seems to be really, the internet doesn't seem to be doing a great job at allowing people to express who they are really, and kind of what they really want to do, and kind of what the stuff is that kind of make people rock.
So and why is that, do you think?
Well, there's been a sort of we keep coming up against this word called plasticization, right? But there's a sort of plasticization of people's identities. And I think that's really kind of got more and more plastic over the last 10 years. And so whereas before, when we didn't have the internet, we had to just be very honest and sort of ourselves with each other, and very kind of genuine.
So you mean you can create a sort of artificial version of yourself?
Yeah.
You do inevitably by being online in the way the platforms are set up. So it inevitably, there's a kind of like fakey celebrityness to everybody.
Well, there's
not really who they are.
There's two things going on. There's three things going on. There was like, you've got the sort of technology is mega kind of primitive anyway. As much as you can talk about AI and all of this sort of great stuff, which is probably going to come, it's still like, if you're building a platform like LinkedIn or Facebook or something now, it still pigeonholes you, and it still kind of turns you into data. And so it turns you into sort of binary code, where you are kind of in this location at that time, you have, this background, you're interested in these things, your name is 20 characters long, your age is 2 characters long, and with these 2 numbers. And so you're kind of, you've been plasticized, basically, you've been digitized. And we've kind of sleepwalked into that, because the technology was only at that sort of level at that time. And I remember getting my first email when we were at the greenhouse, like from Charlie's sister, funnily enough. And I remember thinking, wow, an email, but I had to kind of like set up my account and all this kind of stuff, and then give myself a kind of, an avatar and everything. But really, nothing's going to really advance a lot since then. You're just still a kind of, a kind of concentration of pictures and words and things like that. And your true kind of flesh and blood and your character really struggles to get out. But if you try and kind of bring it out, you're still kind of left with a 2D thing. And then sort of couple that with the fact that probably in the last 10 years, people have started to sort of commoditize their identities a little bit to sell stuff. So if you look at Instagram, you know, most the purpose of most people's Instagrams accounts, not to be kind of cynical about it at all, but is to sort of sell something or sell themselves or sell their services or, you know, to promote themselves. So you know, everyone's on this sort of tip now to sort of promote. Apart from, you know, some people's kind of mothers and whatever, but it's just, you know, it's not the case. But you know, you've got like, and then you kind of now, if you look at kind of platforms like TikTok, it's just completely obvious, right? It's all about this sort of, it's all about this promotion, commoditization. It's all about this sort of, you know, gratitude, like getting the feedback. And so that whole kind of bit that in the beginning is just sort of completely being diluted now. It's gone. And if you even think about things like Clubhouse now, which are great, you've still got this kind of these spaces where people are mostly there to kind of sell something or to get something or to learn something. You know, kind of sort of setting up these forums to kind of sell some services or something like that. So there's been kind of all these things that have sort of happened over the last sort of 10, 20 years, which have kind of meant that your identity has just become more and more plasticized and less about you and what you want to do. And so that is the sort of, that's the nub of what I'm just kind of exploring now, is like, you know, so how can you use technology to get back to that proper mode of like, this is me, I genuinely sort of want to get involved and kind of help and kind of do this thing. And how can you do that, you know, without all the kind of bullshit?
So you're wanting to use the technology to really connect people in their fullness, in the fullness of who they are, you know, uh, with all their kind of paradoxes, contradictions, good and bad, the wholeness of someone, which is the truth. I mean, if you get into a working relationship with someone, you very quickly find out who they are. And rather than go through the bullshit plastic stage where you get together and it all looks great on paper, and then you get together and it's not great at all because all of the other stuff was left out.
Yeah.
Is it a way of bypassing that then, or on kind of? But there's another thing that comes out of that, and that's this sense of trust, because obviously people don't present their full selves because they have all kinds of psychological issues like
Yeah.
self-doubt, or they don't want to show, you know, we're not living in a culture where being vulnerable, showing your weaker parts is valued in any way. So it's almost like a cultural shift you're talking about as well, where it becomes okay to show up as you are. And I think this is fascinating because I really feel like this is up for grabs right now.
Yeah.
And I'm experiencing it myself. I mean, right now doing this, because I used to be so private, and I would never have done something like this. And I will, and it's not exhibitionism either. I'm not suddenly like wanting to share every detail of my life. And I will self-censor when and where it's appropriate. But rather, I'm feeling this sense of the more truthful I am, the more I bring to something with my boundaries intact, you know, not in a kind of unhealthy way where I'm just ripping myself wide open, but really giving as much of myself as I can to any connection or engagement means it will be a higher quality connection.
That's
It will
right.
be more real, it will be more creative, there'll be more potential for something good to come out of it. And it's because of that trust, I guess, now I have, because I trust myself to know where my boundary is. And also, I'm not afraid anymore of showing who I am, even if it's showing a part of me that's not great. And there's a tremendous sense of liberation in that, actually. And
Mm.
when you talk, I feel there's a little bit of that in what you're offering. There's this,
Yeah.
and
Well,
how
you know,
wonderful to be able to really connect with people and find people from all over the world who connect in those very different ways into your interests and allow you to be fully who you are. So you're not just, oh, you're that tech guy, or you're that artist. You're also someone who writes poems. You're also someone who's into S&M. You're also whatever it is. There are all these layers to everybody that in ordinary society wouldn't be compatible.
Yeah.
And that to me looks a lot like what we were doing in the studios at St. Martin's, but in a social sense, where you're bringing together all these different bits of things, putting them together, and what you get is a person, because that's actually what everybody is, right?
Yeah. Well, video is good because video is, and like video, if you think about video and what you're doing and what, the platform that you're creating here, it's a fairly, in the grand scheme of things, it's a fairly new medium. Now, YouTube's been around for a long time, but people have only really started using it, I think, really well, probably since COVID kicked off. I saw Tom York kind of releasing a record on YouTube, like right at the beginning, and thinking, that's great. It's completely without any sort of production quality. It's without any, there's no tuning of knobs. It's just honesty. This is sort of asymmetry. And the great thing about video is that once you kind of, it doesn't sort of invite photoshopping and kind of tarting and things like this. So it's kind of getting there, but what you talk about more importantly is this sort of more of a kind of psychological shift, this sort of psychological understanding and awareness that this is firstly, like, this is what's going on. You've got this plasticization, you've got this kind of this binaryation or something, and then once you kind of understand it, you can kind of deal with it and kind of understand like what that could be useful for. It's definitely not useful for bringing people together and making things happen. I mean, it just sucks.
Well, the other thing now that I guess we have to overcome in a sense is that social media, as it has been, has completely destroyed trust because it's weaponized people. It's totally exploitative. We've been farmed basically. Our interactions are being milked all the time and encouraged one way or the other because it's more profitable. So the psychological damage that's done, do you think that's going to make it harder, or does that make it easier perhaps? Because when you're offered something real that feels real, that you can intuitively know is much more the genuine thing, you'll just go to it so quickly, because the contrast between Facebook and Twitter and this other alternative or these other things will be so stark. And this is one of my little riffs at the moment, is that because the world is in such a fucking state, whenever anyone does something genuine, sincere, stands up in their authenticity, in their open heart, whatever it is, and presents themselves in the world, it's so light and shiny and attractive because the contrast is so great with everything else, that anyone with a beating heart or a kind of any sense of humanity wants to be nearer to that. So, I mean, I've got great faith. It's like a religion for me, this at the moment. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
But I really believe it. I believe it's what, I mean, it's kind of like the healthy origin of celebrity in a way, is that when we see someone standing up in their truth, doing something really with confidence and strongly, it's so attractive to us because, of course, it's that buried part of ourselves that recognizes ourselves in them, in a potential, like, something we would long for ourselves, which means we actually have it. We just haven't realized it yet.
That's right.
So I always feel that anything true and good stands for. And that's why the odds, often the odds are so ridiculous. You've got this massive machine against one little person, but if that one little person is being true, they can win that because it's so fucking attractive,
Yeah.
Does that makes sense?
Could you just say that again?
Yeah.
So you were asking though about so whether that sort of commoditization bit is going to be damaging, or whether people are going to
Yes.
accept it
Yes.
and kind of move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know. I think I sense that the last kind of couple of generations of kids and people that have kind of been using kind of social media as their go-to outlet, as their kind of as their. I mean, we had this cool guy Jay working with us as an intern not so long ago, and he's grown up with it. He's grown up. He doesn't remember not having social media. And I can't imagine that at all. I can't imagine sort of if I put myself back to kind of being 10 or something, and then just sort of discovering things in the real world, like social media being a kind of staple kind of go-to or a kind of way of communicating. Couldn't possibly imagine that. But if you think about like how kids like him and anyone really who's just sort of been kind of in that space for the last 10 years has so kind of naturally kind of got used to the idea of that's the kind of the vocabulary, that's the dialogue, that's the kind of method, those are the channels, those are the rules. Then that can only be irreversible. I mean, I don't think you could ever kind of take that away from somebody's DNA. Like maybe you don't really want to, but it's going to be deep. And so whether it's a sort of whether this kind of renaissance or whatever kind of happens, and everyone goes, "Oh, I just forget about all that. That was just God, you sold my data." That's kind of not really going to happen. I think there's a damage there, and it's a bit like being abused when you're a kid or something. It's kind of you won't really feel it until later. That sounds pretty dark and pessimistic.
No, but also what I think when you say that is perhaps also because they're born in it and they know that environment inside out, and they bring all of that human heritage that's in them just by being born a human to that world with all that adaptability. They will see the holes and the ins and outs of it and the subtleties of it perhaps in a way that we don't because we weren't born in it. So the optimist in me would say perhaps they can see through all of that, and they will know even more certainly a good thing when they see it, and they'll go to it. If we haven't somehow compromised that innate sense of freedom that is in all people, I believe. And maybe just history shows that no matter how horrible the regimes we've created treat people and how dehumanizing and how controlling, you can never eradicate that freedom seeking animal that is in humanity. It always finds a way through. It always brings down the regime in the end because it's innate. It's part of who we are.
What's that theory?
I hope that's true.
What is that deep dark theory? And I'm not suggesting this is the world, but what's that deep dark theory that when an abuser has been abused for kind of so long, there's a syndrome where you start to sort of love your abuser.
Oh yeah, it's not the stock. Fuck, I don't.
It's Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm. Yeah, I don't know.
Syndrome.
Yeah.
And it is kind of like that. And then so without the abuser, like I'm lost. Like where I'm ungrounded. Where am I things? Anyway,
No, none of that. Yeah.
I think, but we're talking in extremes, but
yes,
but they are there. They're sort of pertinent themes. They're kind of threads. They are kind of.
Well, and as you say, because we're not plastic, we're so rich and complex that you can't. Any kind of generalized idea is in a way pointless because it's just not true. The world is so much richer and more complex as we're discovering right now. Through the kind of chaos that's going on. The world is just too complex to say in one sentence, oh, it's this, it's that. But so let's get back into, so what is it that
I'm
you're
sure we could manage.
yeah, well, we can manage, but it won't be it won't have much validity or use, perhaps, apart from pacifying our own insecurities, maybe. So what is it that you're creating with Folkalist then?
So we kind of, we set out 2 years ago to start building a platform, a digital platform, uh, to as a sort of, I suppose it was like a kind of like, in an ideal world, if you really wanted to kind of bring people together, if you wanted to kind of do this project or make this party or kind of create this thing or, this happening or get this business off the ground or this idea kind of rolling, whatever, like where do you go? And the that was the big question. It's like, these existing channels are kind of complicated. They don't sort of really kind of work. There's a kind of mixed salad of things. So I just started piecing together and building a platform where it did work. And I suppose in a kind of most dumbed down sense, it was like an art school version of LinkedIn or whatever, but where you're kind of really focusing on, you know, on real interests and skills. So kind of like really rehabbing, your stuff, kind of understanding what it is, and then using that to kind of find people to kind of make things happen. So it was a platform that's been built over the last year digitally to do that. And so far, we've been working with some guys to build it, and it looks great, and it's sort of ready to go. And I think we're going to launch it now in September. But I just want to kind of dig more first, and do more digging, because what we're trying to do is kind of more than an app. It's more than more than that. It is a kind of thinking about a reset in the way that you think. And so I think for us to just sort of release an app on the App Store and invite people to come and use it and see if it works would be kind of we wouldn't be doing it any favors. So yeah, in its most dumbed down sense at the moment, it's an app, but we are kind of with Igor building an organization, which I think where the kind of interest will mostly be about unpacking these particular things, and really kind of getting to the nub of why, what brings people together, what helps bring people together, what makes those things really work when they do work, rather than just building an app. Because I think this is the app is just part of that thing.
But to be clear though, you're not just aiming it at creatives. It's aimed at everyone, because there are all kinds of interactions and coming together to be had. It could be business, it could be a relationship, it could be a shared interest, it could be any of those things, and all of them mixed together.
And there's a mega frustration as well, that I had with these existing platforms, where if you want to kind of meet somebody and collaborate on something, you end up in these sort of kind of industry specific spaces, like there's these kind of collaboration places for graphic designers, and there's a few for the film industry, there's many for sort of engineering, whatever. But what really, I think what we understand and what we kind of know is that to make things happen really well, you need people from all different backgrounds, from all different spaces and places. And actually, I would be I would love to just work with people, from all over the world to bring things together. They don't necessarily need to be in this kind of tight space. So keep calling it this mixed salad, this sort of mixed salad of people, and it really should be a mixed salad, and not just graphic designers with goatees and ponytails. It's for everyone, and it should be, when I lived in Berlin, this will take it back. When I lived in Berlin, partying was not just for kind of hipsters. It was for everybody, and you could go to like the most radical 3-day party in a sort of prepped out old factory or something, and you would have kind of young hipsters, but you'd also have kind of parents bringing their kids, and you'd also have like grandparents and like, you know, partying away, kind of loving it. And there was this kind of real,
Greengrocers,
there was this real,
grocers, hairdressers,
yeah,
chiropodists.
Tischler and the alto, and people would just sort of come together and just really get into the music and just have a good time, right? And there was none of this these kind of these preconditions about the kind of people you need to be at this party. And Berlin, brilliant for that, because you really,
Sounds a lot like Manchester actually. When well, certainly in the late 80s when I was
right,
there, but
yeah,
I can remember going back to Manchester from London after having been in London for a few years and being so moved, like really almost brought to tears when we went out. We just went out to a night in a club somewhere, and people were having such a fucking good time. And it didn't matter, nobody gave a fuck what you looked like or how you were dressed. It was just about the music and having a good time. And the feeling in the space was so overwhelming and moving. And
yeah,
such a stark contrast to London, I have to say, where it was all about how you look, how cool you are, what you're doing. It was all heart. It was a completely different experience.
yes, totally.
I
And it's
wonder
that,
if that's a good analogy for like your platform and the existing ones, maybe.
it's we keep calling it, we keep coming back to this thing and calling it collective flow, right? Where, and I think about music as a great, music and live music events and things like that are a great example of this. You bring people in and everyone's in this sort of level, on this sort of, on this flow state where, you know, you can look at anybody in the room and go, yeah, and everyone goes, yeah, and like everybody's on the same,
Yeah,
you know, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, or whatever. And it's that kind of magic flow state that we're trying to harness with this thing here. And
that's interesting. That's like an altered state. It's like an altered state of social media, in fact,
yeah,
where you've gone up to this place where whoever you are, everyone can access that place, and it's very pure up there. There's
yeah,
no bullshit. It's just like,
yeah.
it's kind of a bit spiritual, actually. Woo.
There's a kind of there's
To
kind
me,
of
in my mind,
there's
but
a kind of
mm,
you remember, like you will remember as well, this sort of illegal raves probably like in the 90s or whatever. It was all the same, you know, people would sort of just come together and do this sort of thing. But you have these kind of unsaid rules of engagement as well. And that's your sort of, you know, your kind of community rules or something. But it's finding that again, really, and trying to recreate that, you know, and use technology to kind of help with that, but not to kind of dominate it. I suppose is really what we're trying to do. But it's that bit which has just been missing, I think.
let's just pause for 1 minute. Okay. So what I immediately think of is how are you going to avoid the pitfalls of the existing social media? Like, what are you going to do with data and privacy and, manipulation by algorithms, all of that shit?
Not sure yet, really, until we really start testing it. I mean, it has to be a collaborative effort in itself, and you know, part of the kind of paradigm at the moment is that because we don't have the platform yet, we're finding it very difficult to find people to join in. So while we kind of may have worked with quite a lot of people over the last couple of years, you know, we're still yet to find people that sort of understand this flow state or kind of understand the nub of what we're really trying to do. And there's a gazillion more people out there in the world. So and until we kind of find people that understand that really well, we just sort of don't know. But you know, everything has to be sort of done with an air of caution at this stage, I think. Um, but you know, it's interesting. I had a chat with a guy who was a sort of AI policy consultant in Amsterdam, and there are just people kind of, who are really stretching those conversations way beyond anything you and I could do. Who are thinking, they're playing chess with it already. Several levels in advance and kind of really understanding. And it's all good. I mean, there's a lot of goodness out there, and people kind of really understanding, where the pitfalls are, where the dangers are, and smart people are sort of trying to kind of trying to help the rest of us to understand how to deal with it. So until we kind of dig into those things with those folk, we just don't really know yet. It's very early days.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose. I mean, what the great thing is that all those existing platforms have done it already, so we've all got to see what happens when you do it that way. So it's
Yeah,
been a great education for everyone, hasn't it? And
yeah,
in their defense, they didn't set out to become these monsters. It's just a kind of, it's what happens when you go down that corridor, that process. When you follow that process, this is where we ended up. And
you can talk about the plasticization bit on one side, but you could also then you could talk about the whole commoditization bit on the other side, right? Which has been the major screw up, really.
yeah,
And I think you can also take that back to art school. When we left art school, the whole art world was being commodified,
commoditized, commodified.
commoditized,
Both words.
commodified, you know, and and that was
Well, I think it had already been that in some ways forever.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. But
obviously, but
and in many ways that could have changed that's changed the art scene massively as well. I think
but
when
the art school itself was a business by that point.
yeah,
We were lucky that we just got the last sort of dregs of the old way, I feel. And then in the few years after we finished, it was pretty much removed and it was pure business. It was all about, the whole of the education system has become kind of business anyway, hasn't it? Higher education. But you really got a sense of that with the London Institute, even the name of it, which kind of was swallowing up Camberwell, St Martin's, all of those. It
gobble
was just,
gobble
yeah, gobble gobble.
gobble gobble gobble, but it's inevitable that tech was going to do that too.
Yeah,
It's just kind of interesting how massive that became. How huge
the power. This is what
value.
I'm sure you're kind of considering all of this because that power that those companies now have is so toxic. I mean, we all know it. We all know about how corrupting power is, but it's on a scale now
Yeah,
that never before seen. Facebook, there's never been a power like that in the world before that was so multinational, that was in people's lives in such an intimate way. Think about how in your life that stuff is with what it knows, knowing more about you in a sense than you do, because it knows what all your friends are thinking and saying. It knows all the expressions on your face. It's
yeah.
fucking incredible.
I think it will be. I think in like give it a few years, and I think we will be able to kind of look back on the sort of on the commodity stage of the internet. You'll be able to kind of see it and see that it was kind of you can see how it kind of manifested itself, and you'll see how it kind of collapsed itself as well.
Yeah,
And I think that will become very, very obvious. And I think already now, I have kind of people who are not techie at all telling me, oh, did you know that every time you send a WhatsApp message, an advert is being kind of, created for you by your Facebook or your Instagram. People aren't stupid. They are sort of, they are kind of understanding it now and seeing it and understanding that it's fucking annoying. I think there's a lot less prudishness now about kind of data. I think people have kind of just got used to the idea that actually, well, I've got a sort of scale that reads me, so but that's going to help me, so that's kind of okay. The scales aren't going to send me advertising, but there is this sort of category of tech which will always now be kind of remembered as, okay, it was free at the point of entry, but it totally fucked you in every other way. And so I think this is also why Clubhouse is sort of perceivably doing quite well on the outside now, because people are realizing quite quickly it's a platform that isn't interested in advertising anything. It's just a sort of it's a talking space, and you can go in and you're not going to be fed with advertising. You're not going to sell your stuff on there.
Well, how are they making their money then? I don't know it, so I don't know.
I got no idea. They've got the most powerful VCs behind them at the minute. So, but they will. What you're kind of seeing is a jump. You're seeing a jump from all of those the other, let's say the big five or whatever. People are sort of jumping quite quickly and readily into something new. So there's a massive appetite and awareness for a new format, and I think
Is
there's.
is there something of a like a ghettoization going on though? Because like when Parler kind of appeared, and then obviously everyone who was banned from Facebook and Twitter all migrated there, and it tended to be right-wing people or anyone who's kind of like speaking against the sort of overriding values of the existing platforms. So it kind of starts this ghettoization process where different groups of people end up in different spaces, and the reason I say that about Clubhouse, because isn't it just for iPhone users? Because I know
I don't know.
you can't, because I've not got an iPhone, but I've got iPad, but I can't go on it because there's no app for it. So it's like anyone who isn't in the Apple iPhone universe can't go. And I
I don't
wonder,
know.
they'll probably change that. I mean, if it becomes popular enough, but
Yeah.
yeah, that I think there is that's one of the dangers. That would be a good thing to address if
Well, what
not already happening. Is this kind of it needs to be for everybody, because if you start like
yeah,
compartmentalizing people,
yeah.
then
The
we're
least, I
fucked.
think, the least kind of desirable outcome for these things is for them to become divisive, right? And to sort of to separate people out. Because in many ways, that divisiveness and separation, some would say, is a kind of as a result of these platforms. Anyway, it's sort of that's the way they've been kind of set up. They've been set up to kind of silo people, because you can then kind of feed advertising to kind of silos.
Yeah,
So it's very, the more you kind of divide, it's like the true divide and conquer.
yeah, yeah,
But anyway, I think thinking positively, that there will be this switch. There will be this kind of this flip. I think Wikipedia is a great example of something which it's kind of like it's one of the best examples of a sort of collaborative effort, of people coming together to do something, and no money was
it
involved.
just needs to get funded. This is where it's coming unstuck, is that
Yeah,
there isn't everyone uses it, but where if governments and states were really serving the people, they'd all be funding Wikipedia,
yeah,
through the roof. But of
yeah,
course, they're struggling to get money to continue, and obviously it gets more and more. It's a bigger and bigger thing every day to
yeah,
manage.
yeah,
Um, so
yeah.
yeah, there needs to be some way of addressing that side of it. But you're
But
right.
that'll be
Wikipedia
cracked.
is a great collaboration. I mean, that was really original internet. That was one of the kind of shining lights, wasn't it? Of here's what we can do when we do all work together
yeah,
in a very decentralized way.
and
Actually,
it's
I mean,
not.
it's kind of centralized, but there's a very much an aspect of you authoring
Yeah,
part of it.
and it happened very quickly, and it was only thought of in 2000.
Right.
And yeah, it's like the biggest online community of collaborators now. And one of the reasons why it's one of the most successful examples of a collaborative effort is because there's no money involved. Anyone that does it is doing it for the right reasons. Arguably, there's people that will do, post stuff on there which is malicious and whatever, but most people kind of want to do good. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm feeling like in the way that blockchain is kind of disrupting, well, starting with the financial world, but it will spread into other areas. That to me looks like what technology really wants to do, is sort of decentralized, because it's so much more effective and trustworthy and all of those things. And in a way that relates to what we've been saying about this collective intelligence. It's this, there is no overriding control. It's just freeing people up to do what they want to do in the right way, and it works. It really works. It's like it is what's pulling us forwards, I feel. It's where I see humanity wants to go if it's allowed to. It wants to get to this place of increased individual liberty, but much stronger, more real connectivity and collective action, like really efficient collective action.
Totally. And if you kind of allow people to do their thing,
yes, and support them in their thing, then you have a whole group of people who are really capable of coming together to solve a problem, in any given moment.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
Hey, maybe that is the point. We can stop for this time and we'll do our part 2. Because I know we're just getting into it now, but you have to go. So
just warming up.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Well, that was fun. Let's do it. Well, maybe we can do it soon, because I feel like this is the first time I've done a conversation where I feel like we've only just got into it now. And
I'm desperate to jump in the car and come to Norfolk as well.
Yeah.
I'm desperate to jump in the car and go anywhere at the minute. But I mean,
well, as soon as all that bullshit ends, then you're more than welcome. So yeah. All right, brother. Well, let's say goodbye for now, and
lovely to see you.
Do it again soon.
Yeah. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.